Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this specially called action meeting. And before we get started, Mr. Whitworth, I understand that you have the words that are going to allow us to proceed.
I do. In light of the continuing state of emergency declared by Governor Northam, where it is impractical or unsafe to assemble a quorum in a single location, I move that we adopt this agenda to take action to discuss and transact the business statutorily required or necessary to continue operation of the Commonwealth Transportation Board.
I second that motion.
Thank you. Carol, will you call the roll, please?
Will. Mr. Smoot.
Aye.
Mr. Dodson.
Aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Aye.
Ms. Hines.
Aye.
Mr. Yates.
Aye.
Mr. Williams.
Here.
Mr. Whitworth.
Aye.
Ms. DeTunk.
Aye.
Mr. Malbin.
Aye.
Mr. Kasprowitz.
Aye.
Mr. Brown.
Aye.
Mr. Stinson.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Rucker.
Yay.
The roll's complete. The motion's passed.
Thank you, Carol. We are going to be approving the July minutes at the September board meeting. But Carol, do we have any public comment this morning?
I'm waiting for confirmation.
Okay, thank you. We'll just pause for a moment.
There are no public callers on the line.
Okay, thank you. With that, I will turn over the presentation to Commissioner Britch and Michael Westerman from the Attorney General's office.
Thank you, Secretary. Members of the board, morning. If I could have my slide deck pulled up, please. Thank you. This morning's presentation is going to be with regard to the master agreement for the development and tolling of the Hampton Roads Express Lane network. And this is going to serve as an update to the board on the agreement itself, and then hopefully an action item that will be undertaken by the board later in this meeting. I am being joined by Michael Westerman, who is the Senior Assistant Attorney General out of the Attorney General's office, that has been working with the department and the Secretary's office to be able to craft this agreement, and is prepared to be able to address any legal concerns that you might have. And in specific, he will go into greater detail with some aspects of the agreement that have been worked on since our June meeting. So next slide. So the department and HRTAC have continued to collaborate with the Express Lane Network agreement in earnest for almost a year now, a little bit more than a year, but we've made some significant progress since our June meeting, where I gave the same exact presentation to the board on the contents of the agreement. Our progress really is focused on Section 5 of the agreement since the June meeting, which has been to address the Toll Policy Committee as it was previously written. And I'll go into much more detail associated with this. Since June, we've had agreement on the broad terms, and you've seen a copy of the master tolling agreement that had been submitted to you for consideration prior to the July board meeting. As it stands right now, We are in the finalizing the exhibits associated with this and anticipate to have those exhibits complete early part of next week. The agreement does require execution by the Commonwealth Transportation Board, the department, as well as HRTAC. The board's party and role in this has to deal with the tolling policies and providing the responsibility of the tolling back to HRTAC. The agreement has been provided to you in your CTB package that you received earlier this week. Next slide. So I'm going to give a quick overview again of the major terms of the agreement. And these have not changed since June. The first aspect of the agreement is where we define what the express lane network is. And as you can show as we show in the graphic to your right, it is approximately a 45-mile network between on I-64 in the vicinity of Jefferson Avenue and I-64 interchange, all the way through to the I-64, 264, 664 Bowers Hill interchange in Chesapeake. Part of the agreement goes into the contemplation of the as you can see from that same graphic that we have a number of segments, as we're calling it, being brought online at different times. Segment 1 is already in place today. Segment 2 is being constructed as part of the high-rise bridge project. Segment 3 is going to be a part of the expansion project, and segment 4 is a continuation of expansion. The sequence in the operations of the program, as I said before, segments 1, 2, and 3 will likely come online at various times, and it will be operational between now and 2025. The VDOT and work in a mutually agreed upon, be able to expand this network as needed. Next slide. So again, major terms of the agreement that you have in your possession is the procurement and completion of the express lane network. VDOT will be responsible for the design, right-of-way, and construction of the express lane network. HRTAC, the agreement does afford HRTAC the ability to participate in procurement activities as we expand the network. I view this as an opportunity for HRTAC to have insight into the procurement of the tolling equipment predominantly, and how that tolling system will work. We continue to collaborate on the traffic and revenue studies that are associated with the development of the network, as well as the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel Plan of Finance. We are going to be conducting the traffic and revenue studies in phases, and this is going to afford us the opportunity to secure a TIFIA loan for the HRBT in the early part of 2021, that is. And these traffic and revenue studies are going to form the basis for the initial tolling policies that we'll discuss a little bit later in this presentation. The funding for the express lane network is and has been approved by the HRTAC in their plan of finance. And VDOT has committed within this agreement to assist HRTAC with TIFIA and other financing opportunities that may exist in the future. The express lane network in total, once it's constructed and implemented, will become an asset of the Commonwealth, or an asset, which will mean that it's an asset of the department. Next slide. So the tolling, the next section that was contained, or the broad major terms in the agreement, deal with the tolling operations and maintenance. The operations and maintenance will initially be performed on the tolling side by the department, with an eventual transition to HRTAC. The way that we envision this working is that the earliest that we would transition, or the department would transition tolling operations and maintenance to HRTAC, could be when the high-rise bridge section comes online. So this would afford them the opportunity at their discretion to be able to take over segments 1 and 2 in totality. However, the agreement stipulates that the region must assume tolling operations and maintenance no later than toll day 1 for when we bring on the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. When we bring on the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. So we anticipate this being no later than the fall of 2025. The agreement does stipulate that HRTAC may contract with the department to serve as their tolling operations and maintenance entity or operator, but this will have to be a mutually agreed upon contract between the region and the department. I should note that the department will still continue to be responsible for the roadway operations and maintenance of the physical assets, the pavements, the bridges, the tunnel facilities, and this will include the snow and ice and debris removable for all roadway elements. Next slide. So this is where this section, which is section 5 of the agreement, this is predominantly where we have focused our energy for the last, it's 2 months, 6 weeks to 2 months. And it really deals with the establishment of the initial tolling policies. But this section, 1, designates the initial express lanes as hot lanes, and the board took action back in the July meeting to designate the remaining sections of the HOV lanes to hot lanes. And this section also is where the board is agreeing to have HRTAC exercise its tolling authority for the express lane network as contemplated. Those terms and conditions have not changed. Now, what has changed and is highlighted in the green section on your screen, HRTAC will now have the right and responsibility to set those tolling policies, and this is going to include the hours of operations, the toll points there. We're stipulating in the agreement that those toll policies shall comply with federal and state laws and regulations. This will be an electronic only tolling facility. What has changed again in this agreement since you have last seen it is that there will be consideration on how these toll policies impact the safety and efficiency of the system as a whole, not just how the express lanes will work, but also the impact that these toll policies would have on the general purpose lanes. The agreement is now provides for the Commissioner of Highways to review the safety and operational performance of the initial and future toll policies that may be implemented by the region and make a determination of their effect on safety and operations of the system as a whole. The other point that we'll spend a significant amount of time with on the back end of this presentation that we'll have Michael Westerman speak to is the establishment of the initial toll policies and toll policy modifications moving forward. Those are sections 502 and 503 of your agreement. I'll save those portions for Michael to be able to walk you through in greater detail at the end of this presentation. Some other aspects of the toll policy and the procedures are that this will be the toll rate will be set through congestion-based pricing, which will be dynamically based upon the level of congestion that we see along the network. The toll enforcement side of this will continue to rest with the operator of the system. So HRTAC will be then responsible for ensuring the enforcement of the system occurs. The board or the agreement contains criteria that will allow the Commissioner of Highways to suspend tolling under certain conditions, and this is consistent with the other contracts that we have throughout the Commonwealth. And then this agreement also ensures that we will continue to provide a free means of travel along the corridor, which means that the general purpose lanes, commuters and travelers within this corridor will continue to have that free option as general purpose lanes. Next slide. Other sections of the agreement for the broad terms are how the toll revenues and tollback debt would be used. In these sections of the agreement, we establish what the priority of the debt proceeds, what we would use those debt proceeds on, as well as how the toll revenues will be used in the repayment of that debt and to be able to afford the expansion of the express lane network. HRTAC, it will be their duty to regularly submit financial models to the department for review. And the parties in this agreement continue to cooperate to maximize those proceeds from TIFIA to be able to help ensure that we can leverage every dollar that we can to secure a TIFIA loan to be able to help encourage the expansion of the express lane network as contemplated. It should be, there's a minimum of $345 million in debt proceeds that are going to be applied to the HRBT project. And this was as we agreed to back in March of 2019 with the signing of the project administration and finance agreement, the PAFA. The agreement also stipulates that the naming rights for the facility, as shown here, is going to be the Hampton Roads Express Lanes. I've pointed out back in our June meeting, certainly the Commonwealth Transportation Board has the right to name a roadway. However, we have worked collaboratively with the region to ensure that we will keep the name duly noted as the Hampton Roads Express Lane network. The contract does provide an opportunity for compensation events to occur. Michael can touch on that if we want to, but by and large, this is consistent with other contracts that we have. The dispute, no contract can be complete without a dispute resolution process that is contained. Again, those terms have not changed since June, and the term of the overall contract is going to be a 50-year term unless we issue toll financed or issuance of tollback debt later in the 2025 plus range, then it becomes a 40-year term of the contract. But in no means is this longer than July of 2080 that it will retire. With that being said, can I have the next slide, please? So by and large, that's a summation of the major terms of broad terms of the agreement. What we have on the next 3 slides, I'm going to ask Michael Westerman to be able to walk you through, in particular, sections 502 and 503, which again deal with the establishment of the initial tolling policies, the toll policy modifications, and the role and responsibility between the commissioner or between the HRTAC commissioners, the department, in particular the Commissioner of Highways, and the Commonwealth Transportation Board. Michael?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Good morning, Secretary Valentine and members of the board. So as Commissioner Bridge alluded to, sections 502 and 503 of the agreement have undergone over the past month or so a complete rewrite. These are the provisions that govern the respective rights of the CTB, VDOT, and HRTAC with regard to setting the initial tolling policies in the first instance, and then any modifications to those tolling policies during the period of operations. The key difference between provisions governing initial tolling policies and modifications to existing tolling policies is simply the time period for the CTB and commissioner to review proposed modifications. So the first two slides here, I'm going to walk you through the process of reviewing modifications, how that happens, what the options of the CTB are upon reviewing proposed tolling policies, what the outcomes of each of those options are. And then the third slide, I will describe the two review periods that are applicable to initial tolling policies in the first place, and then modifications in the second place. So let's start with the fact that all tolling policies are now subject to CTB review, both the initial setting of the initial ones and modifications that happen in the future. So how do policies get proposed? HRTAC is the entity that's responsible for developing proposed policies and submitting a analysis to the commissioner with a written request that the commissioner review the proposed policies and present them to the CTB. So the commissioner has a duty to do just that. He must present the tolling policies to the CTB within a designated period of time. And so then the question is, well, what is the standard by which the commissioner and the CTB judge proposed tolling policies? There's a very technical definition of material adverse effect that appears in the agreement. To boil it down, in order to be able to reject the tolling policy, the analysis would need to show that the tolling policy that's being proposed is likely to result in a material adverse effect. So material adverse effect is an important definition, and it has two prongs. There's a safety prong and there's an operational efficiency prong. And just without getting way into the weeds, into the technical aspects of how those components are measured, if there's any substantial impact to safety, or if there's a substantial impact to operational efficiency, the commissioner would note that in his presentation to the CTB and would recommend that the CTB direct the commissioner to issue what's called an exception notice with regard to the policies, which in effect rejects the policies. So now I'm going to jump then to the slide that we're looking at now. This slide describes the universe of actions that the CTB has or may take when the commissioner is presenting proposed policies. So the CTB can direct the commissioner to approve policies if the objective analysis demonstrates that no material adverse effect is likely. The second option, the CTB can direct the commissioner to reject the policies if the analysis does the opposite thing, if the analysis demonstrates that a material adverse effect is in fact likely to occur. The third option that the CTB has is the CTB can decide that, notwithstanding the fact that the analysis shows a material adverse effect is likely to be triggered, that if in the discretion of the CTB, the triggering of material adverse effect is marginal, and the CTB can direct the commissioner to approve the policies. The fourth option is if the CTB is not satisfied with the analysis and findings that have been presented by the commissioner, they can direct the commissioner to go back, conduct additional analysis, and come back before the CTB in a subsequent meeting to present new analysis that deals with the concerns that the CTB has articulated. And then there's the fifth option, which is the CTB, after hearing the analysis and findings of the commissioner and understanding the recommendation that the commissioner is making, can take the option to not vote, which would result in a deemed approval, not an express approval, deemed approval of the proposed policies that have been proposed by HRTAC. I'll get into this in the next slide, but there is, for each type of proposed policy, there is a window of time to review the policy during which the CTB and commissioner must take action. If that period runs without the CTB or commissioner taking action, the proposed policy is deemed approved and may be implemented by HRTAC. In the scenario where the commissioner and CTB reject a policy that's proposed by HRTAC, that's essentially final unless HRTAC decides to dispute that finding through the dispute resolution processes in the agreement. And I will note the dispute resolution processes, the processes have stayed exactly the same. However, one thing that has changed in the article that sets out how dispute resolutions are handled is that the CTB and the secretary, as a representative CTB, is a participant in all dispute resolutions under this master tolling agreement. So that is one new thing. The CTB, as a secretary, as a representative, involved in any of these decisions that go to dispute. So could we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so I just laid out sort of the way policies are generated by HRTAC, taken by the commissioner to the board, and reviewed the universe of options that the board has when contemplating tolling policies, and also discussed briefly the standard by which policies are judged. So this is sort of the final piece of the puzzle here. What time periods do the commissioner and the CTB have to review policies? And so the initial tolling policies, there's a 45-day base review period for the commissioner to review the information and present the findings to the CTB. And by the way, it is mandatory. It is a shall rule in the contract that the commissioner review the information and present findings to CTB within that initial 45-day base review period. This 45-day review period can be extended for two reasons. The commissioner can extend it by an additional 30 days if modifications to the current operational analysis are needed. And I'll sidestep for a moment and describe or explain that I believe everybody's aware there's an operational analysis that's been conducted by HRTAC and VDOT collaboratively. And so VDOT has good knowledge of the content of that operational analysis. That is the basis by which these initial policies will be judged. To the extent HRTAC proposes policies that require modifications to that existing operational analysis, the time period can be extended so that VDOT can conduct those modifications, provide the additional analysis that's needed to the CTB. So what's the second rule? Using the 45-day review period can be extended. It can also be extended for 35 additional days on top of the 30 if the CTB directs the commissioner to conduct additional analysis with regard to the initial policies and return in a subsequent meeting. So you see there, the maximum review period for initial tolling policies is 110 days. That's the grand total. So the modifications to the tolling policies are a little different. There's a longer base review period because as we go along through the years with this this network being operational, HRTAC may come to VDOT and to the CTB without a lot of prior collaboration and propose modifications to the tolling policy. So there need to be a longer base review period for the commissioner to review the information that's provided by HRTAC, do his own analysis and findings, and present them to the CTB in that 90-day base period. This 90-day base period can be extended. There's an analogy here to the extension I just described above, the 35-day extension. So this base period can be extended by 45 days if the CTB directs the commissioner to conduct additional analysis and return in a subsequent meeting. So you see the maximum review period is 135 days. It's the 90-day base period plus a 45-day extension if the CTB directs additional analysis. And I'm realizing now that the second to last bullet on the slide is a little bit confusing, but so it's not a 45-day review period here. It's 90 plus a 45-day extension. That's what's possible. So that's the basic framework of the extensive rewrite that's been, and negotiation, frankly, that's been done over the last 5 weeks or so. So, Commissioner, I'll turn it back over to you at this point.
Thank you, Mike.
Hi, this is Carlos, Madam Secretary. I just had a couple questions for our attorney. It's always helpful for me when I'm thinking through how a contract works to actually do some hypotheticals, right? So there's been a lot of energy invested on, what if there's a dispute? What if there's a policy disagreement? Can you walk us through a couple scenarios where the dispute resolution concept might come into play, or where do we foresee that being a risk? Sometimes we spend a lot of energy focusing on that, that oddball situation that might occur, but really is very, very remote, and folks get all kind of amped up about it. But the reality may be that it's very, very unlikely that that ever comes into play. So help me understand, where could there be a risk of us having to escalate something to the dispute resolution process?
Sure, I can answer that question, but I will say, to the extent we're going to go into great depth with me providing legal advice with respect to the respective contract rights, we may need to do that in closed session. I'll say that, but
Yeah,
that's a very fair question. So to answer your question, in the universe of options or the universe of scenarios, the only scenario where we go to dispute resolution is where the CTB and commissioner reject a policy that's been proposed by HRTAC on the basis that it triggers a material adverse effect. That's the only scenario. And that decision holds unless HRTAC decides to opt to go to dispute resolution, in which case the three parties to the contract sit down collaboratively and try to work it out. And one thing that I didn't mention is when the commissioner and CTB do reject a proposed policy, there's a descriptive paragraph in the agreement that describes what the content of that written rejection must contain. One of the things it must contain is, if feasible, the commissioner must propose revisions to the policy, reasonable revisions that HRTAC can make and implement, which would not trigger a material adverse effect. So the whole framework is set up to avoid dispute resolution, to provide reasonable revisions that could be made that would result in an acceptable policy. That, there's always, you can always get in a dispute over contract provisions. And so there's provisions that govern how the three parties sit down and try to resolve a dispute if it does happen.
Michael, thank you for that. I'm looking. Do you have another page to this presentation?
Just one page, Madam Secretary, and that was a quick summation of the next steps that we would take into consideration. As you can see, is just certainly to finalize the presentation for this morning. That was a broad overview of the document as it stands today. The agreement and the next steps would be to finalize the remaining exhibits, which are 90% done. But then the next actions would be the responsibility of the Commonwealth Transportation Board, which would be to review the decision brief that has been provided in the board package, as well as take action on a proposed resolution. So that would be the conclusion of the presentation as a whole, and again, would be accepting of additional questions, some of which Madam Secretary, as you're well aware, that there may be some legal questions that need some additional advice on, legal counsel on.
Yes. So it has come to my attention that a few board members would like to seek some legal advice. And so, Carlos, I really thank you for your question this morning, because you set us up beautifully for this. In order to do that, to seek legal counsel, we would have to go into closed session. Before I ask Mr. Whitworth to present that to us, that option to us, I understand from Carol Mathis that we did have a caller for public comment. And so, Carol, I want to ask you, when is the appropriate time to open public comment? Should we do it before we go into closed session or after?
Madam Secretary, I recommend after. They are unable to get this individual on the line right now, and I would hate to delay the meeting.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Whitworth, may I turn this over to you, please?
Move that the board convene in a closed session pursuant to section 2.2-3711A6 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing an agreement involving the investment of public funds where bargaining is involved and where the financial interest of the Commonwealth would be adversely affected if the discussion were made public at this time. And pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A8 for the purpose of consulting with legal counsel regarding provisions in the agreement requiring legal advice. Additional staff and the attorneys attend the closed deemed necessary and will aid the board in its consideration of this matter.
Carol, will you please call the roll? In favor or opposition? Now, Carol, please call the roll.
Mr. Smoot,
Aye.
Mr. Dodson,
Aye.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Ms. Hines, Mr. Yates, Mr. Williams, Mr. Whitworth,
Aye.
Mr. Tunk. Aye. Mr. Malvin.
I'm sorry, Carol. Aye.
Mr. Kasperlitz.
Aye.
Mr. Brown. Mr. Stinson.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
The roll is complete. The motion is passed.
Thank you, Carol. Let us know when it is appropriate for us to begin discussion.
You're live.
Okay, Mr. Whitworth.
I move we reconvene in open session.
Second.
All those in favor or opposition, Ms. Mathis, will you call the roll?
Mr. Smoot.
Aye.
Mr. Dodson.
Aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Aye.
Ms. Hines.
Aye.
Mr. Yates. Mr. Williams.
Aye.
Mr. Whitworth.
Aye.
Mr. Tunk.
Aye.
Mr. Malvin.
Aye.
Mr. Kasperlitz. Mr. Brown.
Aye.
Mr. Stinson.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Rucker.
Yay.
The roll is complete. The motion's passed.
Thank you, thank you. Just want to say to the group, I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that you all presented, and very pleased to be where we are. So we have a resolution before us. Do I?
We have a public, is there public comment?
Oh, Ms. Mathis, were we able to get a hold of the?
That gentleman is on the line. He asked for a 5-minute heads up when we were ready for public comment.
Madam
So-
Secretary,
Yes.
this might be a good time to do the certification roll call.
Okay. Who has the certification language?
I do.
Okay.
I thought we just did that.
But he didn't read the full certification.
Okay.
Ms. Mathis has,
You want me to read that for you?
hold on one second. Yes, I do, but Ms. Mathis, has the citizen been contacted?
Yes, ma'am. He is currently on the line and he asked for a 5-minute heads up when we were ready for him to speak.
Okay, I think after we do this the certification, then I think it would be a good time for him to speak, and then we'll proceed.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Whitworth.
Madam Chairman, since we're now in open session, we need to take a roll call vote indicating that each member indicates their agreement with the following. That to the best of my knowledge, during the closed meeting, the only matters heard, discussed, or considered were those matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and only those public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened. So we need a roll call.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. All those in favor or opposition? Ms. Mathis, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Smoot,
Aye.
Mr. Dodson,
Aye.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Ms. Hines,
Need a Coke.
Mr. Williams,
Aye.
Mr. Whitworth,
Aye.
Mr. Tunk,
Aye.
Mr. Malbin,
Aye.
Mr. Kasprowitz,
Aye.
Mr. Stinson,
Aye.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Mr. Rucker, Mr. Rucker,
Yay.
the
Mr.
rolls.
Rucker said yay.
Motion's passed. The roll's complete.
Thank you, Carol. Is there anyone who wishes to address
Yes,
the board?
there is.
Madam Secretary.
Yes,
Yes.
I'm
Hear
on the
you.
line if you can hear me. Madam Secretary and members of the CTB, this is calling in outside the Cascades Library in Sterling. And I caught and I had to reflect on how different the process was than the Dulles Toll Road revenues for the Silver Line. That mechanism was set into place. Basically, we didn't have the technology, but it's timely to see procedures that were put into place 15 years ago. But anyway, that's not me. I do want to in excellent to good condition. Thank you for that. Procedural matter, it concerns me that I heard Ms. when your website on
I
June
will
the 30th,
respond at the end.
2020.
I don't want to cut
Has
into
the
your
governor
time
or anybody
addressing.
renew her term? Okay, all right. Well, my concern is that Fairfax County, with a population of almost 1.2, I raised it 18 months ago, and I believe it's time, since we're the largest population jurisdiction in Virginia, that we have representation, and I did suggest to you the concept of a suburban member if you don't wish to not replace. Concern is that under Ms. Hines' tenure, we now have a situation where 87% of the funding in Northern Virginia goes to transit. The overall demand is based on the highway network. 19 environment, the likelihood is demand is going to grow faster in the suburbs. It already has grown fast. Resources where they need to be. I will put some of this into writing. But as far as WMATA goes, I have sent to you and copied you on various communications recently that as of this date, I have had no response from Mr. Wiedefeld or from board member Matt Letourneau in Loudoun County and various other people I've contacted. Kate responded this month. But we're in a situation where we're $1 a day, and prospectively, the losses will be far bigger than they have been in the last 4 or 5 months. So I'm asking this board to take immediate action with obviously input and guidance from the General Assembly, which meets next week. We need to have a plan of action. I sent a couple of days ago an example of what the New York MTA had some kind of emergency meeting in June, but I asked the question of Paul Wiedefeld, has there been any kind of emergency meeting of the WMATA board? And I've had no reply. And so it's a matter of great concern. Among the things that were in the Washington Post article on Monday, it was indicated that the funds to complete the Silver Line Phase 2 may not be available. And so there are a host of things that need to be addressed by the General Assembly and the CTV, and I have suggested some kind of study committee, which would include both legislators, business professionals, but particularly finance professionals, to help evaluate the situation and what the remedies are. I did actually suggest one remedy, which is increasing the peak period fares in Virginia. And so I don't know what more I can say at this time, but I certainly would be pleased to assist you in those endeavors.
Thank you. Mr. Whitfield, thank you for calling in. One point that you raised, I do want to address that we have been working closely with the Secretary of the Commonwealth on all of our board nominations. I want to give particular thanks to those of you whose term had expired but have agreed to serve as we are working through all of the boards within the Transportation Secretariat. They are all done at one time, and we did introduce a rail authority, and so there has been extra time given to our transportation boards, but I do believe in the very near future you will see appointments and reappointments coming forward. So I really thank Mr. Whitworth, Ms. Hines, Mr. Yates, Mr. Stinson for agreeing to stay on with us as we go through this period, which has only been exacerbated by COVID. So thank you. Anybody else, Carol?
Nobody else has dialed in to speak.
So we have a resolution before us. Do I hear a motion?
Moved.
Second the motion to move the original resolution.
To move the resolution. Any further discussion?
Madam Secretary, just for clarification purposes, we're talking about the resolution that was sent on August 12th as part of the original board packet. Is that correct?
That is correct. Any further discussion?
Madam Secretary?
Yes.
Is a motion in order? I'm sorry, an amendment motion in order at this moment?
Yes.
All right, well, I guess I'll make it then. I would move that we amend the resolution to include the 4 paragraphs which were shared with the board last night and this morning I don't know, probably Ms. Mathis needs to put those on the screen since the public
Yes.
hasn't seen them. So I made that motion.
I second the motion.
So we have a motion and a second. Ms. Mathis, can you put the amended resolution on the screen with the amendments?
It's being pulled up now.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Williams?
while she's doing that, which I looked down and she's already done it, let me just, I think it's the appropriate time to debate the amendments.
Yes. Well, we have a first and second. Is it
Yes.
for us? Do we have it? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm going to say any further discussion, and Mr. Williams, I turn it over to you.
I've chaired a lot of committees, ran a lot of meetings in my day. And what I've always tried to avoid was the situation we find ourselves in right now. Here we've got a resolution. We've had the discussions. I've talked to the commissioner. I've talked to Nick. I've talked to various board members. Although I think it's some of the language that was insisted upon is unnecessary and starts pushing me in a direction that I particularly don't like, because I like the separation of management and policy direction.
Mm-hmm.
And now, as of yesterday's conversation I had with the commissioner, I was okay. Now I've got four more. I think it's actually, in my mind, unfair for anyone to ask me right now to vote on these amendments, given that I've had no time to debate them with my peers, no time for any discussion, no time to put forth maybe my issues that I have with it, and have ample time for someone to react back to me. None of that. and you know, it's been tossed around that it's, you know, this is for the next 50 years. Well, the Constitution's amendable. So if they run into a situation 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now, where all this, in my mind, leans towards micromanaging is needed, then they can do it then with them. But, you know, we can adopt a resolution today that we've all had a chance to talk about. We've all had a chance to debate. We've had input from the commissioner and from the secretary's office. We're all comfortable with. And, you know, I don't want to have to vote no on the resolution if it gets amended, but that's probably where I would lean, because it's just not fair to ask me if I haven't had a chance, other than sitting on a screen under COVID restrictions, looking at a couple of faces I can see, but you'd have to scroll to see the others, and not have those discussions that we're always able to have one-on-one. It's just unfair. If y'all, you know, if there's people on the board that desperately need to do this, then give it a couple of months. We'll be back together, hopefully, and we can work it out. It's not life or death, but it is objectionable to me to be asked to vote on it today.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Anybody else?
I'll just speak to this, and I rarely take issue with Mr. Williams. I just think frequently this happens where I think we've actually done it in the board before, where we've made amendments at the table. It's part of the process, and I think probably in this case we've had advice of counsel and others. So I don't think it's unfair. Now I could vote on either resolution, but I don't think that this is unfair. I think, quite frankly, this is the way the process is supposed to work in open session. And, you know, either we vote it up or vote it down. So I am open to the will of the board on this, but and I don't necessarily think this is micromanaging. I think this is, as was stated by the commissioner, an articulation of what the existing process is, and as in many cases, in order to prevent that process from atrophying or deviating, you codify it. So that it's very clear that that's the expectation. So with that being said, I'm flexible. I will, if this passes, I'll vote for the resolution as amended. If it doesn't pass, I'll vote for the resolution as unamended. So.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Anybody else?
Can the original resolution be voted upon before the amended?
Well, we have the
I don't believe so.
No, the amendments need to be voted on
Amendment needs
before
to be voted
the,
on.
So we have the amendments before us. I have a motion and a second. So the vote is whether or not to include these amendments to the resolution. So with that, Ms. Mathis, will you call the roll? All those in favor or opposition, please indicate.
Mr. Smoot,
Aye.
Mr. Dodson,
Aye.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Ms. Hines,
Aye.
Mr. Yates, Mr. Williams,
No.
Mr. Whitworth,
Mr. Whitworth,
Aye.
Mr. Tunk,
Aye.
Mr. Malbin,
Aye.
Mr. Kasperlitz,
Aye.
Mr. Brown,
Aye.
Mr. Stinson,
Aye.
Mr. Miller,
So to be clear, we're voting aye if we want to add the amendments to the original resolution.
correct.
We're voting no if we don't want to add the amendments to the original resolution. Is that correct?
Correct.
I vote no.
Mr. Rucker.
No.
The roll is complete. The motion is passed.
Did you get my vote, Carol?
I did get your vote, Mr. Whitworth.
You did or did not?
I did.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have before us an amended resolution. And this is a resolution that is approving the master tolling agreement with Hampton Roads, as well as governing our structure and working, the CTB structure and working with. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Second.
All those in favor or opposition, Ms. Mathis, please call the roll.
Mr. Smoot,
Aye.
Mr. Dodson,
Aye.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Ms. Hines,
Aye.
Mr. Yates, Mr. Williams,
I'm already on mute.
A very reluctant yes.
Mr. Whitworth,
Aye.
Mr. Tunk,
Aye.
Mr. Malbin,
Aye.
Mr. Kasperlitz,
Aye.
Mr. Brown,
Aye.
Mr. Stinson,
Aye.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Mr. Rucker.
Yay.
The roll's complete. The motion's passed.
So I thank you all very much for, again, just a very thoughtful discussion on this. And the resolution, as far as our working relationship and governance is concerned, can have ongoing discussions and negotiations. But I really, really appreciate the work and the time and the effort of this board to move this forward and to signal your approval of the master tolling agreement with the Hampton Roads region. It has been quite a journey with the region, and I'm very pleased that we have reached this moment. Anything else from anybody? Okay, with that, Ms. Mathis, is there any other issue we need to take up?
No, there is not, Madam Secretary.
Ms. Whitlock, is there anything we need to do to close out this action meeting, or could we simply adjourn?
You can simply adjourn.
Okay. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we adjourn this action meeting and I thank you all again.
Thank you. Thank you.